Good day. I am Sherilyn Francis, and on behalf of the Morehouse School of Medicine Prevention Research Center, we welcome you to part 11 of the Fam Strong 20 Family Meeting Series. So sorry, we had a small tech issue there. So, as I was sharing, we welcome you to part 11 of the Fam Strong virtual series, and we invite you to connect with the MSMPRC via your favorite social media platform using hashtag FamStrong20. The mission The mission of the MSMPRC is to advance scientific knowledge in the field of prevention in African American and other minority communities and to disseminate new information and strategies of prevention. The MSMPRC strongly holds to the applied definition of community based research, which is dynamic, emphasizes community and research entity partnerships, is focused on prevention, is tailor made, is ethnically and culturally focused, and prioritizes health policy to advance health equity. I now present to you part 11 of the FamStrong series entitled Our Money: Financial Health, Employment, and Entrepreneurship, presented by Dr. Sunny Ray Holmes and Pastor Kervance Ross. And now, Professor Holmes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Francis, and I'm very glad to be here as part of this series to talk to you a bit about the economic perspective and how our money and our community can hopefully use this perspective in order to enhance our financial health, employment, and entrepreneurship opportunities. So economics is a lens, it's a framework, and at Spelman College, that is the discipline that I teach, and I'm often telling students on the first day of class that what they think economics is going to be about may not be what they experience. So on the first day, I asked the question, what are they going to talk about? What will you learn in economics? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say money. And then I have to correct them that money is studied in finance, but in economics, we study choice. And so that's why economics gives us a very particular lens in order to consider some of the choices that we're making right now in America in 2020. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the employment situation in the United States. Tens of millions of Americans have applied for unemployment insurance since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. All of us have talked about essential workers, and these workers have always been essential, but this has really become a buzzword or a buzz phrase during this season. So essential now refers to healthcare workers, food service workers, and transportation workers, among many other industries. But in particular, these are workers that do not have optimal healthcare and safety measures. So unfortunately and ironically, the most essential of our labor force right now in this moment are also the most unprotected. Now, the federal government has had a response. Earlier this year, the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, was $2 trillion passed into law, and households received a direct income payment if you met certain criteria. Then there was also help for businesses as well under the Paycheck Protection Program. We all know that as the pandemic has continued on, so have the economic implications with the public health crisis. And as the economy has gone through different stages of closing and opening, and in some places stalling again, all eyes are on the employment situation here in the United States. So just yesterday, the unemployment numbers came out, and we are Glad to know that things are not as severe as they were in the beginning of the year, but now we're looking at gaps in different demographics. While many people are regaining their jobs, there are many essential workers that are not. And of those essential workers, we know that women make up the majority of them, about 76% in healthcare, about 73% in community based services, and people of color in general make up the majority of essential workers in food and agriculture, as well as hospitality services. So when we are seeing these jobs being recreated or regained in society, that is definitely reason to celebrate. But when we look at the rate of job recreation, there's reason to be concerned. So there's the old phrase that when America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. And so right now, America has the coronavirus. But Black America and our Hispanic American communities are being ravaged disproportionately by this virus. A website that collects national data in partnership with the Johns Hopkins University reports that nationwide Black Americans are dying at 2.3 times the rate of white Americans. 21% of all COVID-19 deaths are attributed to Black Americans, and we only make up 13% of the population. So there are some choices that need to be made. And yes, the federal government has given us a response, but how has this response helped us in the short run, and is it sustainable in the long run? Now, something else I tell my students in economics is that economics is known as the dismal science, where it's always doom and gloom with us. And just like I've been reporting now, Black Americans have lower incomes and higher unemployment and disproportionate mortality. So where's the other side to that? But if everything's doom and gloom, do we have any hope? And I do want to say that we do. We do. Economics is about choice, and I do believe that the power of choice and also the benefit of history are going to be two tools that are going to help us forge our own way throughout this dark time. So in terms of choice, I teach my students that today's choices affect tomorrow's outcomes. So small investments in health make a big difference today. Small investments in our own human capital also make a big difference tomorrow. And so in this period in which we've been very still and in our homes, a lot of times that hopefully we've had some time in order to consider how we would like to make different changes going forward. And if that's the case on the micro level, we also hope that that's also the case macro for the entire economy. How might we change and make different decisions going forward such that we can have better outcomes than today? So just a couple of notes about Black entrepreneurship in America. If one of the things that you are thinking about changing and making a choice about, given that we are at this very tenuous time in our history, in our economy, in our society, consider that it's always a good time for Black entrepreneurship. First of all, large banks have an incentive to be involved in terms of lending and partnering with Black businesses. In the current social climate, that's the incentive that they need in order to make sure that they are on the right side of providing the type of resources that are needed to help communities of color grow. And one example that we can talk about that's been in the news lately would be Wells Fargo and the comments that were made by their top leadership. And so that bank absolutely has a motivation in order to do better and work more tenuously with the Black community. Existing Black-owned businesses have created over 1 million jobs and generated over $165 million in revenue, so yet another motivation. But also, Black ownership is but one path to personal financial wellness. And while we are looking to the federal government for the types of choices and economic decisions that they may be making on our behalf, we also must look within our own communities and how we can partner with businesses that are established, providing services where people need them most when they need them the most. So Black economic freedom and how we push back against institutionalized systems that are seeking to keep our unemployment situation corralled off into a certain range, that can be a protest in and of itself, a protest to current conditions and current policies that have led Black Americans to have the outcomes that we have now. So as a last note, I would like to say there is also, as I said, the benefit of history. We know that Black people are dispersed all over the world. And when we look at how the global pandemic is impacting Black people in other nations, it's very interesting to see some of those outcomes compared to the United States. The United States is the largest economy in the world, and we have the most resources and the best technologies, but we do not have the best outcomes in health right now, especially for communities of color. However, when we look at many African nations and many nations that are in the Caribbean, we find very different outcomes. One of the classes I teach at Spelman is health economics, and we talk about levels of stress and how stress can be passed down between generations. And I think we can all agree that right now the nation is experiencing some corporate and collective stress. But in particular, in Black American communities, we have a level of stress known as our allostatic load. And there have been research studies that talk about the allostatic load of Black Americans relative to Black people that live in nations that have Black leadership and governance. Because of the institutionalized systems of racism, classism, and sexism here, the allostatic load of Black people in the world's richest economy tends to be higher. So we have examples that we can look at in the diaspora. And there are lessons to learn from Ghana, from South Africa, also from Kenya, in that these are communities that have that have acquired learned knowledge from previous pandemics, just like we have, but are also now applying them in very efficient ways with regards to sanitation, travel restrictions, emergency operation centers, free testing, treatment, contact tracing. So we too have this knowledge, we too have these practitioners, but we lack that community here. And so I want to encourage us to tap into that community as we're making better choices during this time. Tap into some of that historical strength, that Sankofa strength, as we can consider as we look to other Black communities that are also trying to find their way during this pandemic going forward. So here in the United States, hopefully we can find a bridge there and also find a way in order to match our need with the necessary resources, starting from the bottom up and aggregating from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Holmes. And now we will transition to Pastor Ross.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here and be on this panel with Professor Holmes and the distinguished leadership of the Morehouse School of Medicine. And it is clear to me that there are some specifics that we need to highlight. And if you have a pen or the notes section in your phone, I think it is worth covering in this component. According to CNBC, I found some startling statistics that 66 million Americans have no emergency savings. I know that might shock you. I'll say it again. 66 million Americans of any ethnicity or any color have no emergency savings. Another thing that may be intriguing to you is that the average Black family does not have $1,000 in savings. On top of that, only 13% of men of any hue, of any ethnicity, have more than $50,000 in savings. And as a result of COVID-19, 11 million people have been terminated. And as Professor Holmes has spoken of in COVID-19, they were those individuals who were terminated because they were not categorized as essential workers. Only 6% of women have that amount, that $50,000 in savings, in their savings account alone. Only 6% of women. Around 28% of adults are in a position where they are one emergency away from financial disaster. 28%. One simple emergency would cause a financial disaster for 28% of adults. Based off of a website called gobankingrates.com. I'll give that to you again, gobankingrates.com. More women are in a financial bind than men. They outlined that 62% of women compared to 53% of men are in a financial entanglement. Now, realize that this does not take into account the factor that women are being paid less than men and required to shoulder more responsibility. 37% of Gen Xers do not have a savings account at all. Did you hear that? 37% of Gen Xers do not have a savings account at all. And based off a biblical perspective, seeing that I am a pastor, this is the first generation that is in a position to operate against God's plan, because it is God's plan based off of the Bible for the next generation to be in a better position than their parents. And seeing that this current generation is saddled with lifestyle debt. This is not student loan debt. This is not a mortgage debt. This is lifestyle debt, which are credit cards for accessories or the ability to look good on the gram. With that perspective, this generation is poised to be the first generation in history that is worse off than their parents. And it prompted me not just as a pastor, but understanding as an entrepreneur and realizing that the word entrepreneur and undertaker are synonyms, because an undertaker is one who undertakes a risk, and an entrepreneur is an individual who is comfortable taking a calculated risk based off of the purpose that they have in the marketplace. Seeing that ministry simply means meeting the needs of people, it prompted me a couple of years ago to pen the book, The Business in the Bible, because I early and clearly realized that the Bible, 67% of it had more business than it did spiritual disciplines and principles. Because when you look at the fact that God has designed your purpose to be able to be manifest simply because of what you're able to do in the marketplace, in ministry, and or the mainstream. You'll find the characters like Abraham, who is an agricultural specialist, David, who is a 5-star military general, Joseph, who is an organizational developer, Paul, who is a tent maker, and Jesus himself, who is even a carpenter, were not effective in ministry until they had mastered the marketplace. Marketplace is that space you go in every day to be able to cultivate, make for yourself, and allow people in society to be made better. And when you realize that there are kingdoms that the Bible speaks of, government, entertainment, family, church, education, arts, as well as economics, it is a dual threat to us as church leaders if we only show people the one slice of a 7-slice pie and throw the other 6 slices away. And as an entrepreneur, you start to realize that we have the ability, the fortitude, and the gift to make our business our ministry. It allows us to change the path and the course of our families, our destiny, our wealth, and our communities. And it is amazing that this platform has created a dialogue that would allow all of us to understand that our economics, our entrepreneurship, our education, and our connectivity through relationships allow us to shift those numbers in our favor, have dialogues that minimize the negatives and maximize the positives, and ultimately allow us to see the Bible not just in the context of what happens on Sunday morning, but how we can impact people day to day in our journey beyond COVID-19. So again, I'm excited. I'm honored. I hope that you share with everybody that you're connected to, because this is a conversation that goes beyond just a pandemic. But hopefully this outbreak will change the economy of Black and brown people all over the country. Again, thank you for this opportunity. and I'm excited about the dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes and Pastor Ross. We are now open for questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box, but I have a few questions ready from registration. So first, Professor Holmes and Pastor Ross, can you please define financial health for Black and Brown communities?
Hi, I'll chime in on that. As an economist, as I said, I always differentiate between finance and econ. But when I first graduated from Spelman, I did go work on Wall Street for a while. And that was a wonderful sandbox for figuring out how the very rich see health in terms of financial well-being. I think about having the ability, first of all, to be liquid in the case of an emergency. Mr. Ross, Pastor Ross was very keen to bring up the relative levels of savings for the average American, not even speaking about the average Black American. And so that is a kingdom principle. I know that Pastor Ross can also speak to the discipline, being able to put something aside and not consume and not spend everything that we have once we get it in order to, achieve a certain lifestyle. So that's a choice, right? And so that ability to be liquid and be able to respond in a moment, I think that that's part of financial health. I think also having a community of people that you are very vocal with and explicit with about the changes that you're going through. I know that it's a privilege to have a social safety net, but where we can cultivate those, maybe even outside of the norm, our household, seeing that the economy as a whole is in a very tenuous position, I think this is an opportunity for us to form other types of economic partnerships where we can support each other. And actually on the news here in Atlanta lately, I've seen so many just small businesses and nonprofits that have been coming together in big, amazing ways in order to respond to the basic things that people need. And then finally, I would say to always be open to adjusting your beliefs and values on money. Here in the United States, we don't have collectively very healthy ideas about money. We have lots of we have lots of debt. We see that in individual households. We see that at the country level. We see that in the White House. And so we need to have different mentalities on how we approach debt and the reasons why we are encouraging debt. And when I graduated from Spelman and went to Wall Street in 2004, it was right before the Great Recession. And that was a whole lot of mortgage debt, much of which should have and perhaps could have been redirected into more efficient investments. And so our knowledge and our positioning on debt is something else that can lead us towards financial wellness.
Professor Holmes could do this whole thing all by herself, to be honest with you. I'm just a tie on her suit. And in this process, one of the best books I've read in COVID-19 is a book by Ken Honda called Happy Money. And one of the biggest realities of financial health is our perspective with money. I look at it the same way that you look at your health of your body. And it generally starts with how you think about it. Weightlifting, eating healthy is not so much a result of the physical as much as it is a result of the mental. And many of us have a bad relationship mentally, so it makes us unhealthy. We want to be healthy with our finances, but in our minds, many of our finances are eating fried chicken and making sweets in our finances the way to go. It is not just a mental dynamic, but secondly, a definition of financial health is a relationship dynamic. The same process that a man would have with a woman or vice versa, that we know how to have a good informational conversation, a great interaction, and great habits in our relationship. So it creates a familiarity that allows us to be healthy, that I can check up on my money, that I understand where my money is supposed to go. And it allows me, as Professor Holmes talks about, thirdly, to understand the boundaries of my money, to understand that I cannot get everything I have, use everything that comes into my hand, and never put it aside. It is optimally that you're operating off of 70% of what you're pulling in, which means that you are placing segments on that 30% to put you in a position to always have health, that if something were to go wrong, an emergency were to come up, a situation would be to befall you, that you could make adjustments. And you would have to ask the question, if anything were to go wrong, if I needed to take some time off because mom got sick, if something went right and I needed to make or take a vacation, if I wanted to purchase something that would not affect my regular responsibilities, what would be the EKG meter on my finances? Would my finances have high blood pressure? Would my finances have a heart attack? Would I find my finances in some type of cancer or diabetic stroke or coma? And it is literally about paralleling your finances the same way you parallel your fitness, because both of them run hand in hand. And when we can process it in that nature, even to the level that once we've gotten those three in place, we understand how to have a good relationship with risk, because risk and investment go hand in hand. And many of us don't understand the beauty of the risk, so we take no risk at all. And it causes us to be unhealthy and unbalanced. So the definition is not singular in its scope, it is omnilateral and unilateral in many of its understandings, because we have to now start breaking it down the same way we break down our bodies, the same way we break down our psyche. We've got to break down our health financially so that we can build it up and be strong enough to pass it on.
Thank you. Thank you both. Our next question. So, I've previously read that an African American household has 1/10 the wealth of a Caucasian or white household, which would mean, in layman's terms, for every $10 that a white household has, an African American has $1 in wealth. So the question is, one, is it really feasible for this wealth gap to be closed between Black or brown households and white households? And if so, how do we get there? When do we get there?
I love this question because of its relevance, and but at the same time, this question is very painful because we know that historically, every time we as a community, many times that we as a community have come together in order to pool our wealth collectively, safe and perhaps separate from main society, we've been targeted. One example, an historical example that recently was a 100-year remembrance was the the Tulsa Black Wall Street massacre, right? And so when we're considering how Black assets, how Black resources collectively gather, I don't believe that we've ever had an issue in doing that much. I think the issue is the fact that we are in a country that has systems that does not allow for that to prosper. And it's not just Black Americans. There are definitely other demographics that have found similar footholds, that have found similar difficulties getting footholds in capitalist America. So the question, when do we get beyond that? That is a wonderful question. Also on the news, perhaps some of you have heard about the community of African Americans here in Georgia that have bought land and are looking to establish their own homestead there. Again, this is not a novel idea, but perhaps we're at a time now, and perhaps the entire country is at a position now where we can allow for smaller communities to thrive in this manner by pooling their resources together. And of course, obviously, Black people in places where historically we have not had those types of opportunities to do so unfettered, unhindered, and not terrorized, right? So we've been here many times before. The power of the Black dollar, the power of the Black entrepreneur, and the ideas that come from the Black dollar and the Black entrepreneur are just as valuable as they always have been, but perhaps are always just as threatening as they have been as well. And so I want to encourage people to know about the history that we come from, because this is not new, but also to use our voice, to use our votes, in order to advocate for policies that allow us to thrive economically, whereas in previous generations we were kept from doing so.
I am starting to be convinced that my last name is Holmes, because we're clearly, she's my sister from another mister. I'm just going to take her thunder and ride with it. This reality is so similar, as I heard in a conversation in a prior interview, to us playing a game of Monopoly. And for 430 times, every time you take all of the money away from you. Every time you try to build, I take all of your properties away. Every time you advance, I move you back to the starting point. And then every time you galvanize and make a trade, I just send you to jail. This is what it looks like for this dynamic of this gap that we have to make up, because we've been dealing with this struggle. Every time we move a step forward, we've been pulled back. Every time we've pushed forward and made some gains, it has been taken from us. And it's put us in a position that when we galvanize and come together, then they either burn it down or shift us into a different terrain. And it almost sounds like an episode of Tales from the Crypt, that we keep hearing these stories from the past, and they seemingly begin to look like Groundhog's Day. I do believe that it can be caught up, but it's not going to be a moment that catches up in the reality of now. It forces us to embrace this talented 10% that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about, and realize that there have to be the like-minded of us who will get together with our purpose, our gifts, our calls, and those things that allow us to build businesses that employ people that look like us, that don't allow us to be in the mindset of a post-traumatic slave syndrome, that once those buildings, businesses, and entities are in place, we don't make the verbal mistake of saying, well, that's why I don't do business with Black people, because they don't treat us right, as though you've been in businesses that have treated you right at any point. It allows us to have to change our vocabulary, change our perspective, change our relationships, and then find ourselves connecting with people who have strengths where we have weaknesses. If your business is marketing and my business is economic empowerment, if your business is education and my business is engineering, pooling our opportunities, our strengths and weaknesses together so that we can galvanize and not just buy back the block, develop it, share it, and then teach the next generation behind us how to do the same thing from an earlier age. Can the divide be conquered? It can. Is it impossible? Sometimes it seems that way. How do we do it? Together, one step, $1, and one accomplishment at a time, and then turn around and share it with the next generation.
Thank you both for two extremely powerful answers. So I normally don't do this, but I will give you the option of the question that you can answer next. Would you like to discuss reparations, yes or no, or or opportunity zones?
I think I might be a bit more prepared to discuss opportunity zones from
Okay.
a from a professional standpoint. My reparations reaction might be a bit more knee jerk, but I'll keep it in line.
Okay.
I'm going with my sister. I'll take opportunity zones for 100. That's where I'm
Okay.
going.
Okay, so the question is, you both discussed meaningful ways that communities of color can engage in one cooperative economics and developing structures and entities within their space to keep dollars within their communities. So, first, can you explain for those of us who are not familiar with opportunity zones, what are opportunity zones? And then, two, how can communities of color meaningfully receive the benefits of opportunity zones? So I'll provide a little context for the audience. Opportunity zones are typically established in Black and Brown communities. However, disproportionately, the members of those communities do not receive the benefit, as in they do not develop businesses within these opportunity zones.
I'll jump in here. So my understanding of opportunity zones are that they are aiming to drive long-term private investment into underserved and divested communities. And there have been efforts in Atlanta, two significant efforts that I can think about over the past maybe 20 years or so, a bit longer than that. The first back in the 1990s had some hiccups along the way, such that we came back around in the new leadership after a lot of other, just cleaning some things up. But most recently in 2017, the Trump administration passed the tax cut, formerly known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. To be very frank, it did benefit mostly businesses, not households. But if you were a Black business, you did have benefits that you experienced. And one of the things that this act did was it incentivized successful investors to reduce their tax obligation by funding projects which are addressing public policy needs. So, as Ms. Francis said, there has been criticism that the people that are receiving the funding, that are receiving the loans, that are meeting this metric of being successful, don't look like us. And so I think that that's something to be aware of. There's always a pro and a con, a benefit and a cost. And I also often talk to my students about President Trump's claim that African American unemployment is the best it has ever been historically. And he's right. For 2 years into his administration, absolutely the lowest unemployment we've ever seen. And so to look at the response of the federal government, or that outcome from the federal government, and kind of stick our flags down and say we've arrived, is a bit short-sighted. And the same thing with our opportunity zones. Like, just because we have this opportunity, is it actually being extended to the hands, to the businesses of those individuals that can use it and need it the most? And so that's what we would like to see more of the government response do, is not just show us performative policy, but transformative policy, right? It's not enough that we just see it there. It's not enough that we just know that we have low unemployment, but how is this actually transforming the outcomes for Black Americans and others in the long run? And so even going back to employment rates, as I stated just in yesterday's numbers, the gaps between Black women, Black people in general, and our white counterparts are widening. And so even if we have low unemployment numbers, even if some people are getting their jobs back, over the course of this year, even, we still see that there are these very mismanaged dynamics that need to be addressed. Yes, federally, but we cannot be naive in seeing that there's still a lot of work to be done. So with these federal opportunity zones, I would like to see that money be allocated, of course, to the people that know where the greatest need is, and that requires that it's more people that look like us and that have been getting their hands dirty in the community organizing and working on organizing with different groups for many years. So there's still some work that needs to be done there.
I cannot tell a lie. Professor Holmes and I are Frankie Beverly and Mays. We are one, and we are on the same space. This is the truth, that 2 years into his presidency, there is a great reality of Black economic empowerment. Of course, there are caveats in that component because we also understand that your fiscal year as a president doesn't start immediately walking into the front door. It is the follow up year in that process. So a lot of that has been the benefit of his predecessor. And when you think about these opportunity zones, Professor Holmes is so correct that it's an opportunity in a zone where they feel that there is a disparity, generally in inner city communities. The challenge is these zones have been outlined or zoned prior to them being identified to the knowledge of the normal public in most cases, which is so much of a reason why your vote and your finances behind people that you decide to vote for is key. Because we think about just the vote to go into the quiet booth. But a lot of those times, one of the greatest economic moments you can have is galvanizing like minded business owners to get behind individuals who are operating in areas where you want to invest so that you're in the meetings, that you are a part of the entities, and you have an ear to the planning so that you know about it before everybody else knows about it. Because by the time it makes it to the common knowledge, it's generally too late. Thus, why there are so many players that don't look like us that get the tax benefits, get the tax exemptions that this opportunity benefits their business to do, and make the investment because they've already made the moves prior to it being common knowledge. Can we benefit from it? Yes. We have to not just look at the presidential vote. We've got to look at our councilmen. We've got to look at zoning and planning committees. We have to literally be a part of the conversation. Not only do we need to be a part of the conversation, we have to understand you don't have to stay there to receive the opportunity. There are where I grew up from. I'm from Bankhead. And right now, the Grove Park community, 80% of the Grove Park community is owned by people who don't look like me. The neighborhood that my grandmother's house that I still own and my mom's house have been regentrified and built up. And those businesses are coming in right up under our nose. What we have to do is not just have our finances in a healthy space and in a reserve to invest. We have to have our interest in those healthy spaces. When you know that you're on a committee, when you know that there's a town hall meeting, if you are able to be a part of GMSDC, which is local here in Georgia, the Georgia Minority Supplier Diversity Council. If you're a woman, or you can be a woman business enterprise and realize that you're now putting yourself in conversations that allow you to hear about things when they're happening and as they are planning. When you are part of your city council and things of that nature, doing business with your governments, making sure that you have your contracts and your licenses in place, you now hear about the interactions prior to it. So it's not just enough for us to have the finances. We've got to have the focus and we've got to have our position in place to hear about it, to take advantage of these opportunities that are before us, as opposed to allowing the opportunities to slip away from us because we have the resources, but we haven't been in the right places to get the reconnaissance on the information. So can it be done? Yes, but we've got to be more strategic. We've got to be more attentive, and we've got to make sure that we have the relationships to help us make sure that the investments and the benefits come our way.
We could probably go on for another 3 hours, but the time is running short. So I'm going to ask one last question. And you both alluded to the fact that we are in election season. There is a rapidly approaching election, which will be taking place in November, and a very important federal election by the estimation of many people. Both candidates have discussed economic empowerment plans for Black and Brown communities. One candidate has discussed the Platinum Plan, which is focused on economic empowerment for Black communities as well. So, from your perspective, what components should a federal plan have to truly empower Black and Brown communities?
Well, Ms. Francis, if I had a wish list, a couple of things that would be on there for Black economic empowerment. One would be, and you did allude to reparations earlier, but I would want healthcare because we're being devastated by this disease. So I want healthcare for all. I think that we're better able to serve our communities, our households, and be more productive at our jobs if we're healthy. Second, I would also enact some policy that is going to attempt to address the unemployment situation of Black women, similar to what Pastor Ross was saying in an earlier response, because Black women are uh, part of the household where many times they are the primary caretaker, not necessarily saying that they may be single parents, but simply just taking on the duties of mothering and raising children when they're present. That plus the fact that they may be working outside of the home makes them especially more vulnerable right now during the coronavirus. Not only if they get sick, they would need to take time off of work, but if their children get sick, they would need to take time off of work. And so I think that having some very specific policy that addresses the unemployment situation for all Americans, but in particular for women and Black women, because if you are able to address policy towards those that have the worst outcomes, I believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? And so I believe that by helping those to maintain their connection to, or I should say, to maintain their jobs, and also, here's number three. I just thought about this. This is a big one, but also advocating for divorcing health insurance from employment. Because when we're in a situation like this, where the economy and public health are two dueling crises, then if you lose your job and you also lose health benefits, then, I mean, how do you even begin to recoup without some sort of help? So yes, I would say, we need to think about healthcare. We need to think about divorcing healthcare from employment and also making very specific policies in order to address the unemployment rates for Black women and women in general who are very susceptible to losing their jobs and having to fight more and having to and struggling to recoup them more than other demographics.
I could not agree more. I echo the sentiment. This is definitely a conversation of reparation, realizing that if you are Native American and that you can prove that you are a part of a particular sect of the Native Americans here in the United States, and that you are connected to a reservation on an annual basis, they receive what we would consider reparations. Um, this is an important conversation because if I could go back to that 430 times of playing Monopoly, if you would give me some of the money that you took from me as I've been building the board for 430 times, it would be beneficial. Secondly, approximately, and I'm ballparking, every day there are 100,000 individuals retiring and applying for Social Security a day in America, which means that we are now seeing more seniors in our time frame than we are seeing people enter college from the age of 18. So it is important that we are making sure that these individuals are taken care of from a healthcare standpoint, because a large portion of their retirement and their Social Security is going towards medication, is going towards mental health, and it's going towards maintaining the circumstances that they did not have to maintain prior to this. So understanding that that is a part of the plan. Also, we cannot minimize allowing people who have been marginalized by the prison industrial system, particularly for low offense crimes that got high offense felonies, and putting them in a position that now, because the government has found a way to tax this dynamic, that we clear them up and give them the opportunity to have the same chance, the same lot, and the same space that anybody else that would have committed that same crime would have been able to be the benefactors of, are important when it comes down to the platinum plan for Black and Brown people, because we understand that not only is our judicial system marginalizing us, but our police system marginalizes us, which puts us in a position that often when you're walking into spaces that your investment, your education, and your opportunity allows you to journey into, you may not make it to the meeting because you don't fit the look of this zip code. So there are some of those things that need to be communicated, simply because if you're going to give me an opportunity, you literally have to go back and clear the slate, allow me to be on parallel, and not have me running down the field while I've spotted you 100-yard dash and the field is only 100 yards and I'm starting from the other end. I think that's going to be important. I think it's going to be a voice plan that we need to make sure we get in writing, and that we not just hold the highest office in the land responsible for, but as we trickle down to our more local spaces, that same reality is brought into fruition on a lower level.
Thank you, Professor Holmes, and thank you, Pastor Ross, for an extremely engaging and informative discussion and family meeting. To today's attendees, thank you for spending your Saturday evening with us. On behalf of the Morehouse School of Medicine Prevention Research Center, we thank you for attending part 11 of the FAM Strong 20 virtual series. And again, we invite you to find the MSM PRC via your favorite social media platform using hashtag FAMStrong20. I wish you all a wonderful evening.